Welcome to the podcast where relationships, confidence, and determination all converge into an amazing, heartfelt experience. This is Speaking from the Heart.
Welcome back to episode number 121 of Speaking from the Heart. Today, you already have heard our guest on many previous episodes. As a matter of fact, his voice has been used since episode 2 to not only open our show, but to also close our show with each and every episode. I'm so excited to have the voice of opening and closing Speaking from the Heart, Mr. Michael Dugan, with us today. Michael holds degrees in culinary arts and hotel and restaurant administration, which initially steered him towards a career in the hospitality industry in Seattle, Washington, and Napa Valley, California. However, in 1995, he transitioned to a successful career in technology while still maintaining his fervor for exceptional culinary experiences and admiration for the skilled chefs who guided him. In May of 2021, he shifted gears from the kitchen to the studio and introduced the Voice4Chefs Podcast, aiming to bridge connections with pioneering chefs and imaginative culinary artists where listeners can tune in for an enjoyable, insightful, and flavorful podcast experience. And I'm excited to have him featured in episode number 2 of my episodes featured this month, showcasing individuals that have made a positive contribution to not only Speaking from the Heart, but also my business, Your Speaking Voice LLC. It isn't just about the voice that's behind a microphone sometimes when you get to really know them deep down inside of why they do what they do. It brings a whole other perspective to the table, not only when it comes to understanding and learning how people do what they do, but why they do it as well. I think you're going to find in our interview today with Michael a lot of different things about why he's so passionate about helping others, but at the same time, helpful in ways in which I would have never imagined. And even at the very end, him sharing with me why it was so important to help me out starting out with this podcast really exemplifies the fact of Michael's character, but also why it's so important to mentor others, especially when they need the help the most. But with that, let's go to the episode. All right, we're here with Michael Dugan. Michael, thanks for sharing your heart with us today.
Honored to be here, Josh.
Well, I'm honored that you're here, and people have been wondering since episode 2, I should say, who is this guy that introduces your shows? Well, here we are. I'm talking to him right now, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm really pumped because Michael is one of these people that really helped me get started in my podcast journey. And as I've mentioned in the beginning of this episode, if it wasn't for people like him, I would not be doing this. So, Michael, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me today, because I want to dive into a lot of the things that you do and how your career has been so enriching and helping others. Because one of the things that I always put in my episode notes is that you are a podcast host for chefs and you talk to chefs. Your podcast name is called Voice4Chefs. So I want to start off with talking about that and how you got started with being a chef, because I understand that that was your original intention setting out in life.
Oh my God, Josh. Looking back, I work in technology now, but if I think back and I take you back and everyone back, I was probably in my 20s. And when I was in my 20s, I was floundering and I was trying to figure out, what do I really want to do? So I started out thinking I wanted to be a marine biologist. And that's a big stretch, but I think we lived in New Jersey and I was going to community college and I didn't do so well in the chemistry class. And I just kind of lost my footing. And then my family moved to Washington State in Seattle. And I remember just floundering and trying to just get a job. So I ended up working for McDonald's, flipping burgers. And it was a very tough time because it's a very monotonous job, Mm-hmm. And I remember getting a raise and it was like a 10-cent raise. And I was insulted by the manager. And I'd been there for 6 months or 8 months or whatever. But a coworker told me about this place called the Bear Creek Country Club in Redmond, Washington. And it was opening up this amazing restaurant It'd be equivalent of probably 4 or 5 star restaurant. And they were going to have all these interesting foods from Europe. So I went there just on a whim to do an interview for being like a prep cook. And I knew nothing about cooking at the time. Nothing, zero. When I interviewed, I got the job and they brought us back to taste the menu and to meet the staff and to experience like what it's like to be in a fine dining restaurant. And I fell in love immediately. I was like, this is my calling. This is what I really want to do. So eventually I worked there for, I think, 8 months. And Chef Michael took me in the walk-in and he said, I need to have a conversation. I got to tell you the good news and the bad news. Well, the good news is that I want to keep you. But the bad news is that I have to lay off half my staff. And he said, I can't pay you, but I want you to become my apprentice. And I will teach you everything about the kitchen. And this was a rare opportunity, but I was struggling financially. And I remember getting to know a lot of the chefs there, right? And I befriended a Romanian baker who was a pastry chef, and he just created these incredible dishes. He would make peanut butter pie, and your listeners probably know what pie is, but imagine that you make peanut butter pie by grinding the peanuts into creating a peanut butter to make the pie. And just learning these dishes and creations from scratch, it sucked me in. It grabbed my soul. I was like, I want to do this. So I was living at home, and I'm not proud of that, but I couldn't afford to live anywhere. I was really struggling. And my parents were very supportive, and they saw this change in me. Oh my God, there's something exciting that's happening in his life, because I was really depressed. I'd left New Jersey, I had a girlfriend, and my life was kind of falling apart. But I picked it back up, and I got into the kitchen, and I got a purpose. And I don't know if you know what sautéing is, but sautéing is the concept, right? Is that you're flipping food in a pan, and you might have pasta, you might have vegetables, you might have something else, and you put it on a stove, on a gas stove, and you flip it. You don't use a utensil. Well, in order to learn how to sauté, the chef recommended that I go home and literally put a pan of frozen peas, just take frozen peas in a pan and flip them upside down. And just flip them. And I did. And they went all over the floor. They went all over the kitchen. And I'm telling you, what a disaster, right? I talk about kitchen disasters. But to me, once I learned how to do that, and I learned that technique, I took a full bag of oranges, right? I took it home and I opened it and I peeled a whole bag of oranges to learn how to peel fruit. Because there's a way that you peel it. My wife calls it filleting the fruit. You literally take a really sharp knife and you got to curve it just right to get the skin off. And these techniques I got so fascinated by. So 8 months later, I came back to the chef, and this time I took him into the walk-in and I said, Chef Michael, I can't afford to do this anymore. And he looked at me and he nodded his head. He goes, I understand. I go, I'm living at home. I got to break out. I got to make a living. He goes, well, I want to introduce you to a chef that works at Le Courtyard in Woodinville, which was, 20 miles down the street. And he introduced me to him. He said, you tell him that he needs to hire you. So he did. And what happened was I literally ended up being an apprentice at this French restaurant that was a well-known restaurant in Woodinville called Le Courtyard. And I learned how to fillet salmon. I learned how to debone duck. I learned how to make cheesecakes from scratch. And let me tell you, Josh, I hated cheesecake as a kid because the only time I ever had cheesecake was frozen. But once I learned how you make it from scratch and the different ways that you can prepare it and the sauces that go with it, like fresh raspberry or fresh blueberry, oh my God, it's just incredible. It's the simple things about food, right? But the techniques that I learned in the foundation. So then I was with a sous chef at the Courtyard named Daryl. And Daryl was all excited because he was going to open a restaurant. And in Seattle, there's a very famous restaurant called the Maltby Cafe. And it's like breakfast and lunch, and they have dinner, but they're very famous for breakfast. They have these giant cinnamon rolls. Well, he went to launch this restaurant. And one day, just out of the blue, I was driving home from the courtyard in Woodinville, and I passed the Maltby Cafe, and I stopped in to see how he was doing. Well, I came into the back of the kitchen, right? And there was this huge butcher block. You stand at the butcher block, and people were cutting potatoes, cutting vegetables, stuff like that. It's a giant cutting board, and people can be gathered around it. Well, there were these kids, they were like teenagers joking around. And one of them was holding a knife and just literally talking and almost stabbed his friend, that they were cutting these vegetables.
Wow.
And I grabbed the knife from him. I said, you need to learn how to use a knife. And I said, you almost cut your finger off, this one guy. And this other guy, he almost stabbed the other guy. So I was teaching him, and Daryl looked over and he just gives me this nod. He's like, cool, really cool. And so I worked with him that night. I was exhausted from my job because I worked in the morning and worked breakfast. And I ended up staying with him through the evening. He goes, I'm going to make you whatever you want for dinner. Lobster, whatever you want. Because you were helping these guys out. We'd just stay for a while. So I stayed with him. And then at like 10 o'clock at night, he tells me that they're opening the next morning, the Maltby Cafe. He said, I know you got to go home, but I just want to tell you I'm staying all night. And I looked at him, I said, screw it. I'm going to stay with you. So I actually worked with him through the whole night to help open the restaurant the next morning and fell in love with the industry. And that's kind of my background around cooking.
Wow. From McDonald's.
Yeah.
From McDonald's to cooking with a apprenticeship and then learning to saute with peas and peeling oranges and then going to the famous cafe in Seattle and being able to help mentor others. It almost has come full circle for you, Michael, because for helping with other people that have gone through a lot of different troubles, especially nowadays, post-pandemic. All I hear anymore is about restaurants closing because of extreme overhead and just not being able to have the same level of business as they used to have because of not only the ways in which employment has been, the way that teleworking has kind of decimated some of the restaurant industry too, because a lot of people are preparing their meals at home. I'm kind of curious because you interview other chefs on your show about the importance of a variety of different topics. One of them being burnout, which I know I've caught a few episodes where some chefs have just worked themselves to exhaustion because they're trying to bring that level of perfection or they're trying to get to that next level. I mean, have you felt that way when you were doing that sort of work, when you were learning a lot? And if you had, what were some of the reasons why you were able to navigate through that and then maybe move on? Because I noticed too that you did go into a technological career, but I want to hold off on asking you anything with that because I really am interested more right now about what you've been able to do to help other chefs for that matter.
Well, working in this business when I spent about 10 years in the restaurant business. So I believe that I'm not an expert, but I can definitely talk and speak to it. I studied to be a chef. I went to South Seattle Community College for 2 years, got a culinary arts degree, and then I got a bachelor's degree to become what I wanted to do was own a restaurant. But the burnout rate is so high because, for one, restaurant workers are underpaid. They don't make barely above a minimum wage or a decent living. And I ran into that. I kept saying, no, I want to own a restaurant. I want to keep going and keep doing this. And I looked at people's lives, specifically in the kitchen. Now, in the dining room, it's a little different because the wait staff, they have a little more flexibility. A lot of times they work part-time, and the industry may have changed recently, but it used to be they could work 6 hours instead of 8 hours because they're working at the busy times and then they leave. When you work in a kitchen, that isn't the case. You have to prep before the busy time. You have to clean up after the busy time. I used to work sometimes 15 hours a day, and I knew a lot of people that did that, and they still do that. They could work 6 days a week. So if you'd imagine that you're working 6 days a week, you get minimum vacation, very shitty benefits, to be honest. I mean, it's sad in that way, and it's gotten better. I've talked to a lot of chefs, and I found out that there really is a momentum and a movement to change that, and they're doing that. But as a history, When I was doing it 20 years ago, oh my God, the benefits were horrible. I don't even think they had a 401k plan. Medical and dental were terrible, very minimal vacation. So you burn out is what I'm really getting to. To answer your question, it's like you become exhausted and then mental health issues take over. And you just feel, I wouldn't say worthless, but you feel devalued is probably a good choice of words. What it is that it's a craft. Cooking is a craft, but you don't always feel appreciated. Now, that's not always the case, right? There are a lot of really good restaurants out there. There are a lot of chefs that I've interviewed that have had amazing careers, and they're the ones that I really love to interview because I want to inspire other people to say, you know what, if you're doing this, maybe it's time to make that change and move to a different place or a different area in your career. And I get excited when I have some of these chefs on and they tell their stories about their success. But there is this deep-rooted thing that it's a really strong commitment and you don't take it lightly. And some people have no choice. I made the choice. I literally wanted to go into the restaurant business and learn to be a chef and own a restaurant. But to wrap that up, I was in Napa Valley and I'll never forget it. I was in a restaurant. I was an assistant manager. And I remember this night where a waitress was in the back of the restaurant and she was literally putting in an order and she flipped her hair. She just flipped it. And I thought it was like a bug in her hair or something. And 5 minutes later, I start walking out to the dining room and I see this panic of people. I mean, people were getting up and running out of the restaurant. And I turned to one of my waitstaff and I said, "What's going on?" And they didn't say anything. They pointed at the back window. I went to look at the back window and there was a bullet hole that went through the back window. There was a drive-by shooting that we found out because the cops came. And I went home that night freaked out because I was the one in charge. I couldn't panic. I couldn't cry. I couldn't do anything until I got home. And literally, I just panicked. I mean, I just broke down and I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. That was the catalyst for me leaving the restaurant business because I get low pay, I work long hours, and I don't feel appreciated. And I have to deal with the drive-by shooting. And I come in the next morning to talk to my general manager and she's like, "What happened last night?" She was real supportive, but she was also like, "What happened? You could have handled this better or done this better." I'm like, oh my God, I almost got killed. My waitress almost got killed. Somebody else could have got killed. And so there's that piece that really, it changed me. And that's how I moved out of the restaurant business, but 20 years ago. But I miss it. I really miss the people. I miss the passion and telling these stories about the cooking and that piece of it. I really, really miss it. So I have these inner struggles about it. That's why I podcast. So
Yeah. And when you start out with something that you love the most and you grow into it and you want to be able to stick with it, but you have stuff like that happen where people or things or events happen where it changes your trajectory of whether you want to stay in it or not. I can certainly understand, Michael, like walking away from it. And I would be freaked out if we had some, it's almost the equivalent of having an active shooter happen nowadays, which unfortunately in the United States, that's happening more than ever before. And it's happening at workplaces. So even with what you said about being underappreciated, that would be my final straw too. But if you are then leaving the industry to go into technology and then coming back as a podcast host to talk to chefs, I find that really interesting because
it is.
You're almost channeling yourself through these chefs and being able to do the same thing that you did a number of years ago.
You caught
being
it.
mentored. Yeah.
You caught it.
Is that really why you do it? Is because you want to help these people just as much as they helped you?
So the real reason why I started the podcast?
Oh, here on Speaking from the Heart, we always are here about authenticity. Okay. So I absolutely love to hear why you started it, for sure.
All right. So the door is about to open. It was an amazing experience. I mean, I can't even tell you. I really broke down because I was in Napa Valley, right? And I was in California and I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a plan. I just literally quit. And I moved back home to Seattle. And what happened was my friend, Scott Edwards, reached out to me, or I reached out to him, and he was applying or had started working for this company that was helping with the launch of Windows 95, the operating system. And we were just going into a place in the world where we were going from a different style of computer where people couldn't really interact with it to now graphics and visuals and a whole new world of computers. And that was Windows 95. And I ended up interviewing. Oh my gosh, this is a great story. Thanks for this, because you're bringing back memories. I ended up interviewing for this job, and it was to be basically a support tech for the support and the launch of Windows 95. Huge project with this contract company directly connected to Microsoft. And when I interviewed, I remember they walked me out and they said, well, you failed the tech test. Well, of course I failed the tech test. I didn't have a lot of technical experience, but I tried. But the other parts of the interview, when I brought hospitality and the restaurant business and dealing with challenges, I blew them away. And they said, we want to hire you, but you need to come back in 2 weeks and pass this test. So I studied with my friend, and I really studied and I really learned, and I just absorbed everything for 2 weeks, and I passed the test. And the next thing you know, I was hired. And I now just made this transition. I forgot all about it, but I made this transition from working in the restaurant business to working in technology. It was the ground floor opportunity. Now, what happened later, after working there for a couple months, I had a tech lead named Steve, and he passed away a few years back with cancer, but he was my mentor and he loved me. I remember he took me aside one day and he said, Mike, you're really good with people. I don't know what it is, but you have this way of connecting and disarming people that call in and just calming them down and getting to the problem. I think you need to be a lead. I think you should stop being a tech, and I think I want you to be a lead. He goes, I'm going to take your resume and I'm going to walk it right to the hiring manager. And they had a whole bunch of people coming in, interviewing for this job, and I got the job. So I became a tech lead of 6 technicians or something like that. A couple months later, I was now a tech lead of 14 technicians. And eventually, I really enjoyed it because it was all about building a team, motivating people, giving back, just like what we were talking about in the beginning. It's all about giving back and speaking from the heart. It's all about that. And relationships and just understanding how people were motivated. I was fascinated by that because I learned that in the restaurant business and I carried it forward. My why is really bridging hospitality and technology. It took me a long time to realize that. And it was probably during the podcast that aha moment happened. But for me, it was all about people. It was great to learn the technology and leverage the technology, but it was all about connecting people and building a team. And I loved it. And that's how I started in technology. And that's how I bridged the gap between the two.
I have to pause for myself because when I hear this and I hear that you have this compassion, you have this willingness to learn, when you are not exactly 100% equipped with the needs of a certain job, but yet you have all these other skills that make up for all those things. This is what I usually preach to my coaching clients. I have struggled for so long in my life about having connection with people and wanting to learn and grow and foster not only the relationships, not only the confidence, not only the determination that I'm setting for myself, but for others. And you are setting for me what I feel like is the main point of doing this. I want people to realize that there's not just about what we see on the surface. It's not just about what we need to do to, say, meet a job description or meet the requirements that are listed on a piece of paper or online for that matter of what we need to do to become better. It's about evolving and seeing that there's unlimited possibilities to the different modalities that we have in our lives, whether it is the technological aspects of it, whether it's learning a life skill, which I've done plenty of episodes, Michael, on talking about life skills and why it's important to be able to measure twice, cut once, like those sort of
Yeah.
things. But you saying this really exemplifies the fact that why, first off, this comes full circle for you, because you've been able to use the technological side that you've developed, which was something that you didn't learn initially, but bridge the gap with something that you did learn, and now
Right.
create this awesome medium, I would say, to help others. And that's incredible. I mean, do you feel a sense of pride knowing that you've been able to wrap this all together? Because I feel pretty proud of hearing you say that and what you've been able to accomplish. But I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I just done this. Oh, I just done that. These don't add up to what you need today. And they don't think 3 or 4 dimensionally when it comes to how you can put these all together.
I think for me, the driving force, it's kind of interesting, but when I started as a podcaster, I think back 62 episodes, which isn't a lot for a couple years, but for me, it's a lot because I have a full-time job and my wife and we have an adopted dog, lots of things going on. But for me, at first I thought, oh, I got these starry eyes. I'm like, oh, I want to have this celebrity chef on, right? And what I realized is it's not about that. It's about empowering the guest. It's about bringing somebody else on and making them feel great and helping them navigate through the technology and the struggles and the speaking piece. And that's what really charges me up and makes me feel proud, is when I produce an episode that someone comes back and says, I can't believe that you just did that. It's the guest, or it's somebody that listened to it, or it's my family. Oh my God. I did not realize that my brother listens, my sister listens, my mom listens. They never told me for months. And I'm sitting there with imposter syndrome thinking, oh my God, they're going to hate this. They're going to think it's ridiculous. What the hell is he doing, right? But when they connected to it, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, this is a new way to connect to my own family. My mom listens to every episode. My brother listens to every episode. He did a sabbatical for school, right? And he traveled to the Caribbean and lived there for a year on a sailboat. So now all of a sudden I see the Caribbeans listening to my podcast, and I pinged him and I'm like, you're listening, aren't you? And he's like, yeah, I am. And so that brings me great joy and great pride. It's not about, I'm a podcaster, and you're the same, Josh. I could tell immediately when we connected. You are the same. You are true and honest and authentic. I mean, there's just no question, right? But there are others that you hear about. It's this intimidating process. And I'm like, that's bullshit. I'm sorry. But it's really about connecting. And I feel so proud because I've made friends all over the world. Our podcast is in 60 countries. And I just couldn't believe it. It's just going up. But the relationships are in 60 countries. You know what I'm saying? It's not, oh, I've got downloads and listeners. No, it's the relationships. It's when you meet a follower that really gets it, right? I mean, I have a friend in Indonesia, Chef Gunawan, and oh my God, he's been in Savoir magazine, which is this incredible culinary arts magazine. He's a judge for international pastry competitions, and he's my friend, and he wants to come on the podcast again. And I told him, you need to come visit us in Seattle. And we have these conversations, and it's like, wow, that's what it's all about for me.
You are striking something that I even said to you before we started, is that what started for me, and you remember this, we had this conversation too, and my listeners might not even know this, but this was supposed to be a 90-day experiment to see if I could improve my business. And I said that to you too. I said I was going to do this for my business. That's all I was really wanting to do. I just wanted to get more exposure for myself. But what turned into a 90-day experiment has turned into over a year now of doing this. And it's
surprise.
I know. And it's because of people like you that I have met along the way, which I haven't met everybody that I've been able to encounter, but many of my earlier episodes were because of Toastmasters, which you and I have that common connection, which my audience hasn't heard in a while. Yay, Toastmasters. If you
totally.
Yeah. If you're new to Toastmasters, my fellow listeners, please check out what I have in the episode notes. You will not be disappointed, especially since Toastmasters is celebrating its centennial anniversary this year.
That's right.
But with that said, I've only been to like 20, 30 countries with what I have as listeners. And these are just spots all over the place. And I look at my numbers and I think, man, I'm not in the top 0.1% of podcasts by not even close a margin. And I see these marketing people that says, well, if you want to get booked, you have to be on the top 1%.
There you go.
That's how you get your exposure. And I'm like, that's bullshit.
It is bullshit.
This is what this is about, is that we get these connections, Michael. And that's why I'm so proud that I have had you on this show and I've finally been able to tell the story of who you are and be able to have other people learn a little bit about you and maybe go check out your 60-some episodes, because each of those are about quality, not about quantity, sir.
That's it.
But you make a difference. And that's what's so important about this. And really, this is where it gets to the crux of the question I want to really ask you is, what about doing this? Now you wrap in the technology career, you wrap in your chef career, now you're doing this. What is the proudest moment of being able to do what you've been doing right now? I really am curious. It's been on my mind for the longest time, ever since before episode 1 when I recorded it, because there was a motivation even for you about a year ago that we were talking about. And I really am curious what you have to say.
Josh, there are so many things. I am truly honored that you asked me to do the voiceover for your podcast. I remember you putting it out there, and my friend Linda said, reach out. She told me about this, and I was like, wow. And then you had a whole bunch of people you were talking to, and you came back to me and you said, I really want you to do this. And I was like, really? He goes, I like your voice. It connects. I'm like, okay, cool. But that's one for sure. But recently, I will tell you, there's a couple, and I'll be really quick about this, but I did an interview that was a referral. You can get a lot of referrals. I was interviewing a lavender farmer. I loved her, Renee. Oh my gosh. And Renee, I said to her, I'd love to interview some of your people that you connect with, and I'd love to tell one of their stories. And she goes, you need to talk to Kimberly Pearson. And Josh, if you haven't listened to Kimberly Pearson, oh my gosh, she was incredible. And here's why, because first of all, I just connected with her immediately because my aunt has celiac disease. And my Aunt Nancy, who I love so much, is like one of my heroes in the world because she's always so positive about it. She's always found a way to flip it and say, this is a good way to live your life, and you just have to think differently. And when I remembered that, when I started the podcast, I reached out to her and I said, do you know anyone you would like me to interview around celiac and these tough, challenging food challenges? And she didn't really know. And so I was like, okay, I kept searching and searching while I was going along for 2 years, right? And then I got introduced to Kimberly. Well, Kimberly went to cooking school, so she's a chef, right? She started her own bakery called Rocks and Dirt Bakery out of Camino Island, which is also in Washington State. And I just fell in love with her because her passion is a lot like mine. It's very aligned, but she was so nervous coming on the podcast, and she goes, why are you picking me? And I was like, oh my God, you have this incredible story. It's just incredible. It's like you are doing these incredible things to heal people and inspiring them to think differently, how to bake, how to cook, how to change their life where they can eat in a better way and enjoy the food. And she's a recipe developer. And I think that would be one of my proudest moments, because what happened was she blew up and she didn't expect it. I didn't expect it. But this other friend or somebody that she connected to wanted to post my podcast on their magazine online. And they're a celiac magazine. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And she goes, I just want to honor you and I want to honor Kimberly. And that's the same philosophy I have, right? It's all about honoring. There's no hidden agenda. I don't really give a shit if I grow that much anymore. What I care about is the connection. What I care about is that maybe something I do inspires somebody else, right? Maybe something I do with this podcast helps somebody in their career, helps some connection from one chef to another. I dream of that. I love that. Am I monetizing? A little bit, but barely. I put a lot of money into the podcast, right? But my proudest moment, to circle back, is Kimberly, because I connected with her and we connected quite a bit. And now, oh, I forgot about this. Valerie, who I'll just give a shout out to you, Valerie. I love you, and you have supported me for a long time, even though it was indirect. But we reached out again recently, and she's going to have Kimberly in her celiac group give a talk.
Wow.
And she has a big Facebook group or some other support groups related to celiac and other types of food challenges. And I might not have got it specific, but Valerie's incredible. She's been a Toastmaster for a long time. I think she's retired now, and she's just a life mentor for a lot of people. But that whole circle of connections, all because I dedicated that episode to my Aunt Nancy. And that was just a random thing. And it just changed the way I saw it all. And really, for me, the mission of Voice4Chefs is to honor the chef, the culinary artist, the person that's connected to the chef that in some way gives back to the community. It's not about celebrity. I mean, I've had a celebrity chef on that gives back to the community. It's amazing. Chef Ed, oh my God, he's so giving. But it's not about the status, right? And my other proudest moment, which I'm hoping is going to happen because for over 2 years, I've been really wanting to have this chef on. And it's Melissa Miranda. And I'll send you a clip, her YouTube TEDx talk. It's brilliant. I just watched it today before the interview because I was inspired. But anyway, Melissa, she goes by Mel. She runs a restaurant called Musang in Seattle. And your listeners might have heard of it because she's very well known. And what she did was really put Philippine cuisine on the map in Seattle. And literally, I was dining at her restaurant because my wife said, let's go to Musang. She'd never been. We're sitting at the bar because you can't get a table. They have a small restaurant. It's very community focused. It's like a house, right? Because she wanted it to be a community and not a restaurant. It's all about the experience and connecting to culture. But what was so interesting is I have gone there several times to try to meet her and try to connect with her. And it's really hard because she's so busy and so popular. But I saw her in the kitchen and I went, oh my God, she's here.
Wow.
And I was going to go walk over to her and she disappeared. And we finished up our meal and I said, Carrie, I need to see if I can find her. And I walked towards the kitchen and then I turned around and I'm like, she's right behind my wife at the bar, like right behind helping a server. And I turned around and I said, are you Melissa Miranda? And she looks at me, she smiles and she goes, what can I do for you? I said, you're not going to believe this. And I told her a story about Voice4Chefs. And she looks at me and she smiles and she goes, I'll do it.
Wow.
And I went, wow. Now, the rest of the story is that her pipes just burst because we had a cold freeze. So they had to close the restaurant down. But she looked at me, she told me that, and she said, but I think I'm going to have some downtime, so let's do it. So I'm trying to get hold of her now, and I'm not sure what's going to happen, but really, that's my proudest moment because I've been really wanting to share her story. And not because she's a celebrity, she is, but because she has a truly amazing story. And she gave a TEDx talk that will bring you to tears. I guarantee it. Absolutely guarantee it.
For my listeners, I'll have Michael send that to me and it will be in the episode notes so you can take a listen to it, watch it, and I will definitely watch it too. I'll give you my feedback privately, of course. But Michael, we're pretty much at the end of time, but I want to give you the last few minutes to pitch your podcast of where people can access it. Maybe people are interested in learning a little bit about you too. Maybe they want to reach out to you and have some conversation about your career and how you ended up doing what you're doing. But I'll give you the last few minutes, and then I have some things I want to say before we wrap up to you directly. So go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, the podcast started basically March 6, 2020. Governor Jay Inslee in Seattle, like many places around the world, shut down all restaurants for over 2 weeks. So people lost their jobs. Chefs lost their careers. And I woke up one day with the idea that I wanted to give chefs a voice. It took me several months to figure all this out. And what happened was I came up with the concept with help from several others of Voice4Chefs. And so that name stuck and that became the podcast, is giving chefs a voice. And so the idea was I was going to interview chefs. I was going to interview people around or connected to chefs. And it started out, if you can believe it, I literally called restaurants in Seattle. And when I called them, I'm like, can I speak with your manager? Well, why? Well, I'm starting this podcast. Really love to interview your chef. And so what happened was they would wait, they get back to me in a week, and it would just drag on and on and on and on. But then one day I went to this amazing class and with a Toastmaster named Nancy Jutton. And Nancy is incredible. She wrote a book called Bye Bye Boring Bio. And it's all about guest podcasting and getting on shows and marketing your product or your business or your voice, your message. And I was so inspired. I did a week-long seminar with her. And then I was on Clubhouse. And Clubhouse is an audio-only app. It's been around for a few years. When I got on Clubhouse, I fell in love with the idea, but I didn't want to speak up. I didn't want to talk because you have conversations on Clubhouse. People invite you to speak. It's like a mini podcast. So what happened was I've met this incredible chef who's a Michelin-trained chef named Chef Mimi. And Chef Mimi introduced me to Food as Religion. And Food as Religion is a club on Clubhouse that started with 5,200 members. I became an officer and helped grow it to 8,200 members within a year and a half, I think. I was part of this group. I won't take the credit for it. I really believe Chef Mimi, the co-founder, and many others, but it helped me grow my podcast. So I went from 5 countries to 20 countries to 30 countries to 40 to 50 to 60 and started gathering listeners and connections around the world. What was amazing about it, though, was that I met incredible chefs from around the world. So instead of calling Seattle, I'm now connecting to Australia, I'm connecting to India and places all across the US. And so Voice4Chefs is really now a global podcast with incredible stories from really caring, giving chefs that give back to the community. And I just think that that's something that I would love your listeners to check out and listen to. One person I want to give a shout out to is Chef Maria Campbell, who is a chef out of Philadelphia on your side of the country.
Yes,
I'm in Seattle.
Yep, my side. Yep.
Well, Chef Maria Campbell runs a nonprofit called Cooks Who Care. And this really resonated with me because all the funding from her nonprofit goes to support people with mental health challenges in the hospitality industry. And she created this incredible cookbook and fundraised over $25,000, I think, probably more at this point. But she really inspired me, and her story is there. And I have so many great stories. I have entertaining stories, heartwarming stories. Chef Andy LaRusso, he's a singing chef. He sings and cooks Italian. He's an epic recording artist and a chef. And he's traveled all over the world in big casinos doing huge dinner presentations. And he's my friend and he's my biggest follower. And then when I interviewed him, he was a celebrity chef. He was on the Donnie and Marie show back in the day. He was friends with them. And when I interviewed him, he was my first celebrity. And I was nervous, right? But not anymore. At the time, I didn't realize it. But then we became really good friends. He sung for my wife on her birthday party. So those kind of things are part of the culture of Voice4Chefs. And to find us, I'm on Instagram at Voice4Chefs. Now remember too, it's voice, the number 4 chefs, not FOR, but the number 4 chefs. I have a website, just voice4chefs.com. I have a private Facebook group that you can belong to. But the most important thing I want to share is reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation if this is something you're curious about. If you know someone that would be a great guest with a great story, I invite them. But reach out and communicate. But let me know who you are when you do and where you heard about this from Speaking from the Heart.
Michael, I have to tell you, as somebody that has a voice for chefs, you also had a voice for a coach that didn't know what the hell he was doing. That's me. And you gave me a voice on this world that I never thought I had because of some of the starting techniques and points that if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't have been figuring out a whole community that I could belong to
I
that could
love
ask
that.
some really silly questions that probably made no sense whatsoever to me, but made a lot of sense to others that were struggling. You helped me with getting the intro and outro out with this podcast, which debuted in episode 2. And don't worry, folks, I'm actually been talking with Michael. We haven't really finalized it at this point yet about trying to get a new intro outro that would include Michael again, because his voice is also part of the reason why Speaking from the Heart really exists. But with all those things, what is really truly important to me is that you have this intentionality about wanting to help others. And my goodness, that heart that you have goes so deep, and you don't ask for anything in return. I remember having this conversation like, let me pay you for this at what you're doing for me. And you're like, absolutely not. I don't want to have it. And I'm like, no, I'm going to. And I make that promise to you that I will. And I put that here on the record because in one way or another, I think that we all have this wanting to give, and that's what this is about. But I think that when we are looking at the bigger picture here, what you're doing isn't just about looking at the chefs and helping them, which there is such a pandemic when it comes to mental health with chefs. And I think that you're doing some important work with that. And I encourage you to continue doing that and keep growing that. But more importantly, Michael, if it wasn't for you, there would be no Speaking from the Heart. I deeply mean that.
Oh,
I think that
oh,
I think that people would not
man.
be inspired. And I will tell you, I've had people reach out to me saying, "Who's this guy that does your intro outro? You
Oh,
sound so good." And at the same time, I've had people say to me, "My gosh, my life's been changed because of the stories that you've had on the show." I really appreciate
right.
that too. And I'm like, well, if it wasn't for my friend Michael, that also would have never happened. So for all those reasons, you are the legitimate and pivotal voice of this whole entire process. For all those
Wow.
reasons, Michael, thanks for being on Speaking from the Heart today. It was not only just a privilege, but for you to be part of this experience with me, words will never be able to express that.
And we're Toastmasters.
Yay, Toastmasters.
I mean, we're Toastmasters. We should be able to express it in words, but sometimes when it comes to that kind of emotion, it's really tough.
Absolutely. And I think that we work on that technique nevertheless. But for all those reasons, thank you so much. It was really a privilege to have you on the show.
You're so welcome, and it's such an honor. And it's so great to see this show become successful.
Again, I really want to thank Michael so much for just being part of this show and always being part of this show, if you really look at it from that perspective, and providing so much information for me starting out, learning about how to podcast, learning how to be able to grow, and the guests that we'll have even go above and beyond what I'm even sharing with you today. And I'm really excited to be sharing with all of you what those remaining individuals are. But at this time, I just want to thank Michael for what he's been to me, to be able to help out, to be able to learn and grow in this industry. And although I have a lot more work to do and a lot more people that I want to reach, I know that he's been instrumental with his voice to be able to have another voice on Speaking from the Heart. But I will also put a couple links into the episode notes that he referenced today that will also help you with some context that he shared. The first thing is being Melissa's TEDx talk, which he talked about Melissa during the show. I'll leave a link in there, in which he did a TEDx talk called Building Resilience and Community in the Service Industry. I'll leave that in the notes. And also, we'll put a link into a very meaningful fundraising effort called Cooks Who Care. So if you're interested in taking a look at either one of those will be available as well. But let's even dig into the fact that Michael brings a perspective to the restaurant industry that needs to be heard. People that work in that industry do thankless jobs. And I know that there's plenty of opportunity in viral sensation videos in which people are tipping and they are giving people that recognition, but it's not simply enough. Sure, there are people that are terrible and they do not do their service that they should, and they in themselves need to check out why they are not doing the level of service that they should be doing. But if you really think about it, and we peel back all the onions, all the oranges, and all the sautéing of the peas, you start to realize that there's bigger areas that we need to focus on when it comes to the mental health crisis that even affects cooks, managers, and the associated individuals. I love Michael's mission. It's really to help give them that voice, which speaks to even what I'm doing here, to give people that voice, to be able to help others achieve the best versions of themselves. The ultimate mission as to the reason why we started this in the first place. But that age-old question about what is on your heart, going all the way back to episode 2, the very debut of Michael himself too on this show, really goes back to the fact that we need to be able to learn and grow in a variety of different perspectives. And here's yet another perspective as to why self-development, business development, all these tools that coaches provide are so important for the overall growth and the furtherance of moving ourselves forward. But the passion of cooking, it's something that goes back ages and ages, all the way back to human civilizations first starting out. Because if it wasn't for cooking, if it wasn't for that pastime, if it wasn't for the creativity that we can have by using various ingredients, various spices, various types of sautéing methods, cooking methods for that matter, it wouldn't be able to have the effect, the industry-wide trending that it has today. But burnout, just like we've had in one of our most recent episodes featuring Simon Rinne, certainly exemplifies yet again that exist, and not only in these areas, but in areas in which we might often not think about. Do you often feel that your life comes full circle as a result? To be able to have interactions with people so that they don't have to live in that area anymore? Let's face it, Michael took a big risk. He stepped out of his comfort zone and he was able to help with a variety of different areas using his tech skills to be able to not only reinforce his hard skills, but the soft skills that come alongside of it. And yet, here we are again, talking about Toastmasters. It's the universal circle in my life that keeps on coming back around. And it should be a good indicator for you of how you can keep moving forward. Because what motivates you? In Michael's case, what motivates you to connect with your audience? To engage with them? Who is really listening to your own content? What is really needed for that content to be able to push forward the agenda that you're trying to have? Because there's a right agenda, but also a wrong agenda as well. Is it about reach? Is it simply about doing a 90-day experiment to see if it even works? Because let's face it, I know somebody that did that for their podcast. And if you're just joining us, it was me. What turned into what was really a 90-day experiment became so much more for me. It became so much more for my guests. It's become so much more for my clients, which I refer to them these episodes. But really, it's not about the selfish aspect of being able to do this or even putting this out there that really counts the most. It's about helping others without any sort of recognition, without any sort of payback, because that's not what I'm really looking for. Of course, it would be really great to grab a client or two or make a quick dollar, but we all know that that isn't what this is about. It isn't about the money. It isn't about the fame or the fortune. It's about helping others and flipping the script on what really is what is on your heart. Because if you can relate to the engagement today of what Michael and I had, which we have not talked in person like this for quite a long time up until this interview, if it shows you today that you can have this kind of content development in your life with somebody without even knowing them very well until just this very moment, then maybe you need to re-examine who you're surrounding yourself with. As a matter of fact, let's ask this question. Do you have a Kimberly, just as what Michael even talked about today, that just help you, even if you think that they don't help in the first place? Would you be excited for more of a 10-cent raise or even opening a chef position at a resort or being able to mentor some of the most world-class chefs because of your knowledge, skills, and abilities? I don't know about you, but the fame and the fortune of a 10-cent raise doesn't seem to be really what I'm cut out to be anymore, and probably for you, not so much as well. But it's not happening with the snap of the fingers. It takes consistency. It takes building a network of relationships. It means gaining confidence in your trade, connecting with things that you might have never connected before in terms of the dots. But oh yes, as you always have heard, it's about the determination, just as what Michael says every time he opens the show for me, that really counts the most. You have to stay determined, especially in this ever-changing world, even for the world of chefs, to be able to have a voice, to be able to break out of just peeling onions, being able to manage a kitchen, being able to get your steak well done, but more importantly, being served a world-class meal of epic proportions. And that meal consists of opportunities that you never thought of before. I don't know where you are in your life today and whether this episode goes full circle for you. Maybe these are the things that you needed to hear from Michael and I's conversation. But the thing is, you can have the skills, you can have the motivation, you can have the ability to have other people listen to your content, even if you try it out for 90 days. You have to just start somewhere today, and Michael did that over 30-some years ago, and look where he's at now. He's gotten so far. And I know that for you, my listeners, it's not just following those footsteps. It's not just about being mentored by the right people. It's not just about cooking the right meal for somebody else. It's about really helping others to navigate, especially with the interests that we have, to find the path in which they can be unlocked, to not only see their true potential, but to be able to mentor somebody that will help you follow their footsteps in the future. That is the ultimate reward and the ultimate opportunity for you if you're willing to do it. And I know you can if you just try. Again, I'm going to turn it over to Michael as we wrap up here at the end, as I always do. But from the bottom of my heart, Michael, as you listen to this today, thank you for what you've given me. You have no idea from the bottom of my heart what it has meant for you to open and end my show. But more importantly, the friendships that I've gained through this podcast are ever enduring because of you. Thanks for listening to episode number 121 of Speaking from the Heart, and I look forward to hearing from your heart very soon.
Thanks for listening. For more information about our podcast and future shows, search for Speaking from the Heart to subscribe and be notified wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit us at www.yourspeakingvoice.biz for more information about potential services that can help you create the best version of yourself. See you next time.